Hello, world. Good morning, namaste, and Nisam Bulavinaka from Sydney, Australia. I am Sashi Singh, and welcome to Sashi Singh's Talking Point. In episode 24 this week, we will shortly meet our chief guest, Dr. Jalesi Nakarawa, Doctor of Philosophy in Law and a People's Alliance provisional candidate for the next general elections in Fiji. Dr. Nakarawa will be discussing with me his writings on the facade of democracy in the Fiji context, the governmentalization of the Etho-K board, the spectre of ouster clauses, analyze the issue of emergency powers, find out about selective justice and the rule of law, and a lot more in today's SST program. I hope wherever you are well settled in to enjoy another couple of hours of enlightening interview with my chief guest. As always, may I please request that you share the SSTP page on your own timelines so that we may share the interview with Dr. Nakarawa with as many interested people as possible. To ensure that you receive instant notifications for all future programs, please like the SSTP page and follow us as well. And if you're joining us for the very first time, a big welcome to you, to our regulars, our milestone followers, and our top fans. Welcome back for yet another episode. I hope you enjoy today's program. Welcome to the Thinking People's program, Sashi Singh's Talking Point, live on Facebook and on YouTube. As always, we begin today's program with a warm welcome to our regular contributor, former Fiji TV journalist Nikhil Singh, to tell us of the key happenings in the week from Fiji and Australia. Nikhil, welcome to SSTP. A very good morning to you.
Good morning, Sashi and Bulavinaka, to all the viewers.
Wonderful. Well, first to Fiji. And making the news is the Fiji First Party. They've written to the Supervisor of Elections regarding the alleged conduct of several opposition political parties. The General Secretary of the Fiji First Party is also the Attorney General, Ayaz Sayed Qayyum. Nikhil, what exactly is the ruling party's gripe here, and have we seen any reaction from the opposition parties?
Sashi, the Fiji Village has reported that the Fiji First Party has written to the Supervisor of Elections regarding their concerns about the way not only political parties, the Fiji Sun is conducting their public opinion polls for the general elections, statements made by Harun Ali Shah at a Fiji Labour Party rally in Lautoka regarding government tender processes, Sodelpa not stating how they will fund the new policies being announced, and the fundraising activities by the People's Alliance and the National Federation Party. In a Fiji Times report, Fiji First Party General Secretary Ayaz Sayed Qayyum, who also happens to be the Minister for Elections, claimed recent fundraising events by the People's Alliance Party and the National Federation Party overseas, among other things, could be used to, I quote, launder money. He said this in a letter sent to the Supervisor of Elections, Mohammed Saneem, on Wednesday last week. Now, we have seen an almost immediate response from the opposition political parties, Sashi, on this, and also the Fiji Sun, a newspaper widely accused of being the Bainimarama government's propaganda arm. Fiji Sun's acting publisher, Rossi Davivarata, has told Fiji Village that their newspaper has been publishing the independent Western Force Research Public Opinion Survey before the 2018 general election. She says the poll still uses the same methodology and nothing has changed. The Fiji Labour Party stalwart and former Member of Parliament Harun Ali Shah, in relation to the concerns raised about his statement by the Attorney General, well, Shah has said that he stands by the statement he made at the FLP rally in Galitu, Lautoka, regarding the government tender processes. Shah has said that he has evidence. However, he will not release the names of his informants and will not release figures, accounts, and names unless he has got statutory declarations. The National Federation Party, their leader Biman Prasad told the Fiji Times that the Attorney General should base his allegations on evidence and not flimsy assertions. Prasad said it was not surprising that the Attorney General has great dislike for fundraising drives such as dinners that are organized by the NFP because the Fiji First main source of funding is hefty donations by business owners, as clearly seen from the party's donor lists from 2014 to 2019. Prasad goes on to say that Ayah Sayed Qayyum is the last person to lecture us about laws, transparency, and accountability. Um, Prasad says, and I quote, if anything, the donor lists of Fiji First make a great case study for forensic audit to determine the authenticity of the source of funds in strict compliance to the Political Parties Registration, Conduct, Funding and Disclosures Act. Prasad said the Attorney General must explain how a businessman linked to a well known pharmacy chain and his family donated $50,000 on the 15th of October 2018. The People's Alliance Party General Secretary Sakyasin Ditoka says the party will only respond to allegations made by the Fiji First Party if and when requested by the Supervisor of Elections, Sashi.
All right, and sticking with actions and complaints against the opposition political parties, the Fiji Elections Office has referred the Viliamingavoka-led Sodelpa Party and a representative of the Unity Fiji Party to the Fiji Independent Commission Against Corruption, FICAC. What are the charges or allegations here, Nikhil?
Well, Sashi, firstly, I think it's important to highlight that this is all as a consequence of the laws, the amendments made to the Electoral Act introduced by Ayah Sayed Qayyum himself. Now, the Fiji Elections Office says it has found the Sodelpa party has breached Section 116 of the Electoral Act in failing to immediately publish the source of funding for its proposed initiatives as part of its campaign for the 2022 general election. The Supervisor of Elections, Mohammed Sanim, says since the commencement of the campaign period, the Fiji Elections Office and the Electoral Commission have emphasized to all parties to adhere to the campaign rules, and in this case, they found that despite publishing most of its campaign promises as early as the 30th of April 2022, Sodelpa has failed to specify how they are going to fund the promises to date. Given that the breach has continued from as early as 30th April 2022, Sanim says he has exercised his powers under the Electoral Act and directed Sodelpa to remove the campaign materials. I understand that the party has followed that directive, Sashi. Now, turning to Unity Fiji, their representative Ratu Chope now the Malavu has been referred to FICAC for a possible breach of the Electoral Act. In a statement, the Fiji Elections Office stated they had referred the case to FICAC after receiving a complaint from a member of the public highlighting a Facebook post in which the representative of Unity Fiji agreed to sponsor a set of rugby uniforms in return for a pledge of support to Unity Fiji by a rugby club, Sashi.
Well, it'll be very interesting to see how many political candidates are sidelined before the actual election date is announced or how many investigations are underway. Now, the Attorney General still has made comments about politicians wanting to remain in power. This has drawn some fierce response from the opposition, Nikhil.
Yes, certainly not the he's not the flavor of the week, is he, Sashi? At a Nandi Women's Forum held at the Nandi Civic Centre, the Attorney General said, and I quote, a lot of people want to come into government because they want to have power. A lot of people, those political parties, they want to go into government for the sake of becoming a minister. They just want to get into government, want to have power, not because they want to improve the country, not because they want to put in place good policies. Now, the Attorney General has copped it from the opposition, Sashi. The Fiji Labour Party leader, Mahinda Chaudhry, said Qayyum's statement regarding power-hungry politicians who have nothing to offer the country is in fact an apt description of Syed Qayyum himself. He says if anyone in the country is power hungry, It is Qayyum and the cap fits him perfectly. Chowdhury says instead of making hollow statements about opposition politicians and political parties, the minister should be looking at his own failed record in office. He says they have seen unprecedented social, economic, and political turmoil under the Bainimarama government's stewardship, where previous governments had done better. He goes on to say that Syed Qayyum was forced to slash the 2019-2020 budget by a massive $1 billion dollars because of debt unsustainability, drastically reducing expenditure in the social sector, and no other government has such a dismal record in office. The NFP leader Biman Prasad didn't hold back either, Sashi. He said it is the Prime Minister and the Attorney General who have shown their insatiable greed for power by running all over the country and using forums to shamelessly display their gutter level political ways. Prasad says Syed Qayyum should look at himself in the mirror to see how he has become the de facto prime minister. He said this is coming from a man who came to power through the barrel of the gun, and as the Attorney General, he has been responsible for many draconian laws that were shoved down the throats of people to simply ensure both he and the Prime Minister consolidated their hold on power. Prasad says it is hypocrisy of the highest order for Syed Qayyum to label others as power hungry when he and the Prime Minister hold multiple key cabinet portfolios and ministerial responsibilities. Prasad summarized and finished off his statement by saying, um, "Who can forget the level 9 debacle of 2019 of 2018 of December 2018 when Syed Qayyum led his caucus into hiding for 48 hours to avoid being served in person the electoral petition, Sashi."
Nikhil, I don't know what to think about statements made by the Fiji First government ministers as of late. A few weeks ago, Fiji First Minister Dr. Mahendra Reddy said his party leader was born so Fijians and Indo-Fijians could have equal citizenry. Now we have another minister with another bizarre statement, which has been called out by the National Federation Party. Please tell us more.
Well, Dr. Manu Reddy certainly made headlines, and this time it is Employment Minister Pravin Bala. He told a group of Hindu devotees at a temple in Lotoka, Sashi, that in order to maintain the current level of political stability, they should take steps to ensure they could continue sitting in peace and harmony. NFP leader Biman Prasad said the comments made by the Employment Minister Bala at the religious event were despicable, totally unethical, and an example of gutter level politics. Prasad said Mr. Kumar's or Mr. Bala's comments were, I quote, a direct threat clearly aimed at vote buying. This is similar to the Attorney General's statement in October 2018 when he said people putting a dagger to their necks if they didn't vote for Vorenge Bainimarama. Nobody in his or her right frame of mind would threaten people of all places at a temple about making the right political choice, which is supporting Fiji First, if they wanted to continue such celebrations in future. Prasad says that is why till now they have not condemned Agriculture Minister Mahendra Reddy for his remarks at Wairuku Temple recently when he falsely claimed that Indo-Fijians were only provided equal rights after 2013 by Bainimarama, Sashi.
All right, Nikhil, closer to home now. The New South Wales Premier's budget delivery appears to have been overshadowed with his alleged involvement with the appointment of the former Deputy Premier to a plush $500,000 job in New York. What's happening here?
Well, the latest is the former New South Wales Deputy Premier has been temporarily blocked from taking up the taxpayer-funded job in New York after his appointment came under scrutiny from ministers. The state's upper house has passed a motion on Wednesday last week to halt the appointment while an inquiry is undertaken into how the the former deputy premier, became the New South Wales senior trade and investment commissioner just 6 months after quitting politics. Berolaro created the job, which has a $500,000 salary when he was trade minister. Now, Labor's member of parliament in the upper house, Penny Sharp, called for the inquiry due to the controversial nature of the appointment. She said, and I quote, "This is one of the murkiest appointments we have seen from this 12-year-old government. If John Barilaro is genuinely the best person for the job, let's see the process he went through and how he was endorsed." Sashi, this reeks of the infamous Captain Speak, and Dominic Perrottet is not having a good day on this at the moment.
Jobs for the boys, they say. Now, Nikhil, you've reported on this before. Our hard-working teachers and nurses are just not happy with their employer. Are we going to see another round of industrial action, meaning teachers and nurses walking off their jobs?
Well, Sashi, we can add 10 train drivers to that list now. That has also got teachers and nurses preparing to take industrial action. Now, Nine News has reported that Sydney is being warned of 4 days of mayhem as train drivers, nurses, and teachers prepare to strike next week. Train drivers will kick off the industrial action on Tuesday, starting with keeping trains at a top speed of 60 kilometers per hour. By Friday, drivers will refuse to operate foreign built trains, which means many will be out of action. The state government met with rail unions last week on Friday night and offered a 3% pay rise in exchange for a halt to the planned strike. The union has agreed to talk to members, but is confident the strike will go ahead, Sashi. The union has claimed the government has not addressed safety concerns over new trains. Now, Tuesday will also see nurses and midwives walk off the job, though the union has said enough nurses will be on duty and that patient care will not be compromised. And on Thursday, teachers at public schools and Catholic schools will strike. The government this week warned that unions participating in illegal strike action would face increased fines of up to $55,000 on the first day and $27,500 for each day after. I don't think this will do any favors for the government, Sashi.
Not at all, Nikhil. Well, look, thank you very much for your contribution, as always. Sincerely appreciated. You have a wonderful day and a fantastic week ahead. Thanks once again, Nikhil.
Thank you, Sashi.
You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point on Facebook Live and on YouTube. We ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. Fijians want to know. Please like and follow the SSTP page if you have not done so. I have an important announcement to share with our viewers before we begin our program proper. Sashi Singh's Talking Point, SSTP, recognizes that questioning, constructive arguments, and opinions are part of conversation. But posts with aggressive personal attacks, profanity, name calling, swearing, defamatory nature, and or threatening will be removed immediately, and offenders will be blocked from being a part of the SSTP program. So let's observe these rules and enjoy the program without calling people names and being subjected to profanity, etc. And just before we meet our chief guest, thank you to all the viewers this morning with your wonderful comments. Welcome to SSTP's episode 24. And someone has asked, will there be any Fiji First candidates on SSTP? In the interest of transparency, let me say once again that I have extended an invitation to the Attorney General, to the Prime Minister via his office, to his Permanent Secretary, and to a number of ministers. The invitation to all Fiji First party government ministers, whoever they are, party leaders, invitation stands, and they are welcome to come forward and represent their party's policies, achievements, and subject themselves to some questioning from me so that we can all enjoy their presence in the program and see what they have to say as Fiji heads to the next elections. So I can assure each and every one of you that the invitation to the Fiji First Party stands. However, in their absence, we will continue doing the SSTP program and meet as many candidates as we can from all the opposition parties. Thank you very much, and we continue with time now to meet our chief guest on SSTP. Dr. Jalesi Nakarawa was a former assistant professor in law at the Fiji National University until last year. He lectured in constitutional law, administrative law, legal writing, business law, jurisprudence, and criminal and civil procedures. From February 2011 to September 2017, Dr. Nakarawa was involved in community work in Waikato, New Zealand, where he was a community advisor and also served as the president of the Fiji Waikato community for more than 10 years, where he advocated for Pacific Island communities regarding access to social protection programs. My chief guest was also an assistant commissioner of prisons in Fiji for a period of 3 years. He was also a senior assistant secretary, security and defense at the Fiji Ministry of Home Affairs in the 1990s. With that background, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Jalesi Nakarawa to Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Nisam Bulavinaka Kemani, good afternoon to you in Fiji. Dr. Nakarawa, welcome to SSTP.
Mula Nagasasi and good afternoon. And greetings to all the listeners tuning in, both in Fiji and overseas. It is indeed a privilege and an honor to be invited to be the chief guest in this program, Sashi. I take it it's the 24th SSTP episode.
Yes, indeed, it is episode 24. In fact, it should have been 25 because we had two episodes with the leader of the National Federation Party, so I called it Part A and Part 1 and Part 2. However, welcome once again, Dr. Nakarawa. Let me begin by finding out a little bit about your good self. Let's start at the beginning. So, where are your roots from? Where were you born?
Yes, Sashi, I was born in the village of Lawaki in Kasaleka in the island of Kandau.
Okay.
My parents, Vilikesan Bulewa and Amelia Andy, both from the village of Lawaki in Kandau. I came from a family of about 8. There were 6 boys and 2 girls. And Sashi, my father actually fought in the Second World War in the Solomon Campaign, but unfortunately he passed away when I was about 5. And my eldest brother was in Queen Victoria School. And my mother was actually pregnant with my youngest sister. That is basically a background of my family, Sashi.
So you're a son of a veteran soldier who fought in World War II in the Solomons. That must be a very, very proud thing for your family, Dr. Nakarawa.
Yes, Sashi. And looking back now, I'm sort of grateful to the ex-servicemen fund because I think they actually sort of stepped in when my father passed away, and they assisted my mother over the years. I'm not sure how much it was, but it was about $30 or $40 a fortnight. And when one of the siblings turns 18, the amount goes down. By the time I was in school, I remember she was receiving about $19 a month, which was a lot of help at that time.
Sure. And of course, hardship experienced by a lot of families in those days, and more so now with the way poverty has hit Fiji. Let me ask you, who would you say was an early influence in your life?
Yeah, like I said, Sashi, my father is basically, he was a veteran, and we did not live in the village. We basically lived in the farm. We were on our own. And my earliest memories was that of my siblings traveling to the village to spend the week there to attend school. And it would be lonely out there in the farm, so I usually tagged along to follow my elder siblings to the village. In the process, I not only tagged along to the village, I also tagged along to school. So
Hmm.
I basically entered the school system quite early, and I remember that until year 6, I was in the same class as my elder brother. And in those days, the teachers, they basically sort of accepted I was tagging along, and I just sort of progressed from there.
You you must have tagged along very, very well because you are now You've got your doctorate, a doctor in philosophy in law. Let me ask you about your education. What prompted you, or when did you lean towards the legal side of your academic life?
Yeah, thank you, Sasi. My earliest recollection of education, like I said, it was a means of getting away from the loneliness of staying in the farm when I tagged along with my elder siblings. But
Mhm.
later on in my education, Sasi, I was faced, I came face to face with the realities of life without parents, without a parent. So it was quite a big struggle for me, my education. And that's basically why I dropped off at Morris Brothers High School, because the pressure became overwhelming. I didn't have a father, so to speak, to go to ask for my educational needs. So the pressure became a little overwhelming, Sasi, and that's why I dropped off. But all along, at the back of my mind, I always wondered what would have been the difference if my father had been alive to support my education, Sasi. And I've always thought that I could have made it. Maybe that was the driving force behind my education, Sasi.
Well, with all due respect to your late dad, I believe many will agree with me, if not everyone. You have made it because you've reached the very high accolades of an academic career. And at this point, let me ask you, you worked at the Fiji National University as an assistant professor in law. How did you find that experience?
Yes, Sasi. I think when I took up that appointment, Sasi, I was basically interested in being able to impart practical knowledge to people who were studying law there. I really, my emphasis was on that they should learn to apply the skills they are learning to what is happening around them. I always reminded my students, if you cannot do that, then what you're learning here is of no use to you and to the people you're going to serve. And uh, and I used to emphasize that to my students, Sashi. And I think when I left Fiji National University, I sort of thought that the focus of education in Fiji as a whole should shift, because at the moment we are looking at it at education as a means of securing employment. But employment out there, Sashi, as you know, is cutthroat business.
Yes.
We have three universities throwing out graduates every year. And I think my personal opinion is that the focus of education should shift rather than obtaining employment. It should equip students with the skills to be able to secure life, either in employment or in working for themselves.
All right. Really something to ponder on. Now, you mentioned you left the Fiji National University. Why did you resign from this academic post?
Yes, interestingly, Sasi, because I was approached to enter politics while I was there, and I basically resigned to prepare for the election.
All right, and let me ask you now then about your early political aspirations. Which was the first political party you were affiliated with?
Yes, Sasi. Interestingly, I was never interested in political parties, so to speak. I just want to touch on experience that made a big change in the way I looked at politics, Sasi. I actually started with the corrections or prisons department way back in 1974 when I was quite young. So during the coup in 1987, I was actually working on the floor at the maximum security prison. And I was there on the night they brought in Prime Minister Babano. And I was actually the person locking the cells at the top of the maximum. And I remember clearly that Dr. Babandra was the last man up. After the rest of the people were locked up, he was the last man up. And I was putting him in his cell. And by then, all the inmates there were making a lot of noises because they knew by then what was happening. And to be frank, Sashi, I never forgot the anguish on Dr. Babandra's face. And as I was about to lock the door, he actually grabbed my boot and requested me for assistance. He basically said, "How about these people searching there?" So I had to stand there and give him a bit of comfort. I told him, "Sir, don't worry about these people. Take a rest. When I lock this door, it will not open until tomorrow morning."
Mhm.
So when I was standing there, I was thinking, Sashi, what a dilemma. From the Prime Minister's office one day to a cell in the maximum security prison the next. I guess that is where my interest in politics, Sashi, started. Because then I went on to study at the University of South Pacific. I pursued a double degree program in history, politics, and management.
All right. Now, that itself is quite a story in what prompted you towards politics. Then what would you say was the driving force behind your interest in politics?
Yes, I think, such when I say that was the trigger to my interest in politics, not so much on party politics, so to speak.
Hmm.
My interest was on the mechanics of politics, of governance. Why did Dr. Bavandra end up where he was? That's basically what was my interest in the whole scenario. And during my studies, I was never interested in entering politics or party politics, so to speak.
Right.
My interest was basically to go behind the scenes and understand the mechanics of what was happening.
All right. So, when did you decide to enter into active politics? Uh, you're a candidate now for the People's Alliance. When
Yeah.
was that decision made?
Yes, interestingly, Sashi, by when the coup happened in 2006, I was always putting out opinions in social media. And I made it a point to comment on what was happening. Even up to the time when I was at FNU, I still put out articles in social media, critiquing, not really criticizing, but critiquing what the government was doing. It came to a point where I thought, what was the use of all these write ups in the social media if nobody was listening to it? The government wasn't bothered by all this. And that's basically when the request came if I can enter politics. And I thought, yeah, I think this is the time to get in if I really want to make a difference rather than just making a comment from the outsides of what is happening in Parliament, so to speak. And that is why I'm here.
What was your family's reaction, Dr. Nakarawa, when you advised them that you were going to enter politics and was going to contest the forthcoming general elections in Fiji?
Yeah, I think they were quite concerned with my safety, so to speak, Sasi. But even before that, when I was always writing articles in the social media, they were always concerned about my well-being. But at the end, I just convinced them, look, I can't keep continuing with what I'm doing, just making commentary on the sideline. If I want to really make a change, I need to enter the arena and make the change from within.
All
And
right.
at
Now,
the end of the day, they accepted it, Sasi.
all right. One must have their family's blessings and support to actively participate in something that they have a passion for. Dr. Nakarawa, what is the People's Alliance message that appeals to you most?
Yeah, I think the most appealing message to me is just that we need to change for the benefit of our future generation. If we want to leave behind something that the future generation can enjoy and benefit from, we need to step in now and make the change. That is basically the message that I found attractive, and the ability to be able to sit and listen to other views.
Okay. All right. Now, in your view, how does the People's Alliance Party resonate with the public? What's your perception of that?
Yes, Sasi, interestingly, when I first entered politics, when the request came, that was under the umbrella of the Sudelpa party. Sasi.
Mm-hmm.
So when I accepted that, the approach came with the advice that if I accept it, that I should make a trip to Kandau because they wanted me to get the support of my own people.
Yes.
So I was still at FNU at the time, Sashi, when I made a trip to Kandau in 2020, I think. I went to touch base with the people of Kandau and my chiefs just to find out what they thought. So in that first trip, Sashi, I got the verbal support from the people and the chiefs that they will support me if I stand for Sudelpa. Unfortunately, at that time, Sashi, the conflict in Sudelpa was beginning to boil over. And when in Kandavo, they basically asked me the question, if the split comes in Sudelpa, where would you stand? And I told them that that question I can only answer after the split happens. I cannot answer it now. So when the split happened, I went back to Kandavo. And this time around, Sashi, they asked me, okay, where are you standing now? And I said, yeah, at the moment, my assessment of the parties, the alliance has got the best chance of making it to government. And the people of Kandavus totally agreed with it. So when I came back to Subo, Sashi, I made up my mind with the support of my people in Kandavu that Kandavu is going to go down with the alliance party.
All right.
And that's
And
why
go on. That's why.
Yeah, that's why. And I came back, Sasi, with the support letters from the chiefs of Kandau. And when I applied for a ticket to the Alliance, I went for the interview. I basically produced the letters to support my application.
All right. Now, let's discuss the People's Alliance and the National Federation Party coalition plans. As you are fully aware, there is the Memorandum of Understanding between the two parties. What are your thoughts about the merger post elections?
I think, Sasi, that is a great idea, Sasi, and I fully support that MOU. Because if you look at it, Sasi, I mean, Mr. Rambuka has got a lot of experience. He's a former prime minister. And you look at Biman is an academic, and he knows the ins and out of economics. So there you've got a team that basically can salvage the country. What is happening now, Sasi?
You are on the ground level there in Fiji. Election fever is on. In your view, what is the public response or perception to the planned merger between the two parties?
Yes, Sasi, there are people who have reservations about it, but I don't really have any reservations. But mostly, most of the people I meet, I converse with, they tend to agree that the team will make a good team if they form the next government. And
You
we cannot say, I mean, people will agree with it and some people won't agree with it, but we just have to move forward with what we have said.
you just used the word some people have reservations. Indeed, some people have time and again raised the issue about the disaster of the 1999 merger between Mr. Rambuka and Mr. J. Ram Reddy. What would you say to these people, given the current circumstances of a planned merger between the two parties?
Yes, I always hear the argument that the merger at that time, that both the Indo-Fijian community and the Turkey community were not ready with that kind of merger that was happening. That's what they say. And maybe they are correct, but for me, I look at things as realistically. I'm pragmatic, and I think for me personally, I look at what is happening on the ground, and the best way forward is the MOU for the alliance to work with the NFP post-election.
Sitiveni Rambuka of 2022, what does he bring to the table, insofar as you are concerned, as a party candidate?
Yeah. Sashi, like I said, I don't agree with any coup, Sashi. For me personally, a coup is a coup, it's illegal, and that is it. But Rambuka participated in that coup in 1997, and people are still going back 30 years ago. But Rambuka has changed within those 30 years. Whatever the merits of the argument, whatever the rights and the wrongs of it, I don't want to go down that path. Like I said, I am realistic, I am practical. I look at what is in front of me, and I'm convinced that Rambuka has changed over the years. He has had a go at the Prime Minister's office. He now realizes what is involved with the governance of the country. And he certainly must have learned from that. And who am I to criticize when he can garner support from the people? And I think it's a great platform to support.
All right. And on the other side of the coin, we have Professor Biman Prasad of the National Federation Party. What does he bring to the table, you think?
Well, like I said, Sashi, he is an economist. He is, and I'm always wondering why our current Attorney General and Minister for Economy, he is a lawyer by profession, and I'm not sure what he doing with the economy of the country. I mean, with Biman, when he speaks on economic issues, you understand what he's saying. It's coming from an expert, and he brings a lot to the table in terms of salvaging the economy of the country. Sashi.
Do you think at this current juncture in Fiji's political life that there should be more of a consultative process in trying to take the country forward in an even keel rather than having a divide and rule attitude?
Yes, Sashi, I think that is really very, very important for the survival of the country. The government, any government, needs to consult with the people, needs to consult with stakeholders, because that is basically the problem with Fiji at the moment. There is no consult, consulting in the case of the government.
All right, have a drink of water, have a little break.
Yeah,
You are
thank you.
watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest today is Dr. Jalesi Nakarawa, Doctor of Philosophy in Law and the People's Alliance provisional candidate. Please like, follow, and share the SSTP page if you can. Let me now explore with you, Dr. Nakarawa, some writings that you have posted, and let me begin with your piece titled The Facade of Democracy. Are we pretending that we have a democracy in Fiji? Now, you stated in that article in the first line, and I quote, "Let us drop all pretense and say it as we see it. The constitutional democracy that we currently have in Fiji is a charade that hides pure autocracy, or in layman's terms, dictatorship." End of quote. Why did you call the constitutional democracy in Fiji a charade? Please tell me more.
Yes, thank you, Sasi. For Sasi, a democratic state is basically where citizens elect their own leaders, and the government itself is bound by the law. And the government ensures too that the law is respected among the citizens. And if you look at what is happening in Fiji, Sasi, that is part of what we call a democracy or constitutional democracy. But that is only part of it, Sasi, and that's why I have called it. It's a facade. It's a facade of democracy. It's a charade, Sasi, because when you look deeper into it, you see that it's just a pure dictatorship. They hardly consult people. They make laws to suit their own agenda, and the law doesn't even apply to them in various instances, Sasi. And to me, we are sort of deceiving ourselves thinking that we have a democracy.
That is why you called it a charade, a
Yeah,
facade.
that's why I call it a charade, a facade.
Okay, let me now discuss the rule of law with you. You wrote that the rule of law applies to everyone, from the prime minister to the toilet cleaner, to use your words. That is, we are all equal under law. These requirements are found in the 2013 Constitution, Section 2, 1 of the Constitution. Let me ask you, what is the objective of the Constitution?
Yes, firstly, Sasi, let me just say this in simple terms. The Constitution is there for two purposes.
Mhm.
One, to limit the powers of the government, and two, to protect the rights of its people. That's basically the fundamental purpose of a constitution, which is supreme, like in our case. Okay, and let me just go back a little, Sasi. The concept of the supremacy of the law. It goes right back to the Greek civilization. But in our current understanding of it, it basically started with the British. I mean, the British were getting disillusioned with the rule of the king because the king's word was law. So they decided that it would be better if the king was also under the law, the same law. And that's where the rule of law came in, Sasi, and the supremacy of the constitution to replace the king. And the king, to also ensure that the king is also under the law. And that's what it's all about when you're talking about constitutional democracy, that we are all equal under the law. And the law applies the same from the prime minister to the person cleaning on the street. And this is important, Sash. If I may just touch on it, I want to really clear this point
Sure,
because
go ahead.
there is a there is an example that can clearly state this is in the Bible, Sash. The Christians believe that the Bible contains the law of God. And if you go to the beginning of the Bible, God basically told Adam and Eve, don't eat this fruit because the day you eat it, you will die. Now, irrespective of what the fruit was, whether it was a banana or apple, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that there was a law in place. You eat this, you disobey this order, you die. Later on in the Bible, it says that the wages of sin is death, and sin is transgression of the law. So this is a law that is in the Bible. Now, this is the best illustration of the rule of law. So Jesus Christ came into the world. He, Christians believe, was the creator. He created those laws. And he could have easily changed those laws. But he didn't. He came in to die to pay for the wages of those sins, which means that the law was supreme, and even he, as creator, had to abide by that law. That is the best illustration I can give, Cecil, with the supremacy of the rule of law.
All right. You also wrote, and I quote, in the section, one principles of the foundation of constitutional democracy is the supremacy of the Constitution affixed to freedom and the rule of law secured by the limitation and separation of powers. End of quote. You then said that discussing the separation of powers is like flogging a dead horse. What did you mean by this?
Yes, Sashi, the concept of separation of powers, we hear it almost every day now in Fiji.
Hmm.
It's like flogging a dead horse. But the point is that we need to see this to happen. Okay? The separation of powers, the concept is there for a purpose. Because the government has got a lot of power in its hands. And that's why the Constitution is there, to ensure that that power is exercised within the ambit of the law and to protect the individuals' rights of the country. And that's why you have the legislature, and you have the executive, and you have the judiciary. These functions are important, Sashi, that they are separated. Because we need to remember the executive, in their role, they actually overlap these functions. They, on one side, they are the executive. They basically enforce the law. On the other side, they are part of the legislature that make this law. So if there is no clear demarcation between this road, you end up with what is happening in Fiji today. I always call it such that they are ruling by law instead of adhering to the rule of law.
Ruling by law instead
Ruling by law,
of adhering to the rule of law.
rule of law. They create laws to justify, to legitimize whatever they want to do. And I think there was an article in the Fiji Times yesterday. They have a rule for everything. That's basically what I'm saying.
That was, I think, by Richard Naidu.
By Richard Naidu. That's the one, Shashi.
Yes. Dr. Nakarawa, talking about the separation of powers, the executive branch, how important is it for the executive branch, that is the government, to respect and abide by the separation of powers where judiciary is totally separate? And has the current government, in your view, abided by this principle of the separation of powers?
Yes, sadly, I must say that, in my opinion, the government has failed miserably to adhere to the separation of powers. And it's very important because, like I said, as executive, they have a lot of powers on their hands because they have the whole government machinery, the police, FICAC, the military, prisons behind them because they enforce this law. And it is a requirement of the concept of separation of powers that they take a step backward. They do not interfere with the judiciary. And when that interfere, and not only the judiciary, we have got constitutional officers. And that's why the Commissioner of Police, the Solicitor General, the DPP, that's why they are counted as constitutional officers to ensure their independence. And when they are not independent, the rule of law suffers. And generally, it goes on to the people.
I'm going to come back in a little while to discuss some specific cases with you regarding the separation of powers, Dr. Nakarawa. But for now, the principle of limitation is effected, you said, through independent constitutional officers that provide a check on government power. And you also said that these include the police, FICAC, DPP, the military, the correction services, Human Rights Commission, the Auditor General's Office, FNPF, statutory boards, and the judiciary. You wrote that the reality over the years has eroded public confidence in the independence of these institutions. Why do you think this has happened? Why the erosion of confidence?
Okay, Sasi, let me just give you an example. I think that's the best way to explain this. I want to go back. I think I was still at FNU at Fiji National University at that time when this installation of the Vunivalu was about to happen in Mau.
I remember that.
And the police came in and intervened and stopped the installation with the support of the military. I remember very clearly, Sasi, that afternoon I was watching the news at home and I saw the police, the commissioner of police, and the commissioner of the Native Lands Commission. They were giving a press interview. And I remember clearly the commissioner saying, the commissioner of police, Sasi, that he was directed by the commissioner of Native Lands Commission to intervene. And I was sitting there, Sasi, I was quite shocked by that statement. That is coming from a holder of a constitutional office who is supposedly independent. And he said that he was instructed by the chairman, Native Lands Commission, to intervene. That was my first issue with that statement, Sasi. One, as Commissioner of Police, he is independent. He does not act on an instruction from anybody else. Two, I don't believe, Sasi, the chairman of the NLC had powers to intervene in that installation. And these are the kind of things that I say, Sasi, because this erodes public confidence on constitutional officers when they begin to act, on the instruction of others, supposedly, like they said, when they should act on their own judgment, professional judgment.
Given that example that you've just given regarding the planned installation of the Vunivalu, now, what's the redress in terms of law? What or where can one go to seek redress?
Yes, Sashi, I was interested in what what transpired after that. I was hoping that Ratapanisa Dakumba would take those concerned to court, but it did not happen. Because the way I looked at it, Sashi, then, and I still believe in it now, the chairman of NLC is empowered to step in when there is a dispute about a chiefly title. Okay? But that normally happens, and this is supported by case laws that they have attended to as a tribunal. They only come in when there is a dispute after the installation of a chief. Then they step in and they make their ruling based on what's in front of them. They don't step in when the installation is happening because that is entirely out of their jurisdiction. that is a traditional function that is left to the customary performance of the drone. And I was hoping, Sasi, that Ratu Apenes Lakamba would take that to court, but it did not happen.
Now, Dr. Nakarawa, you have also stated that at the heart of the rule of law is the police, and now in Fiji, by extension, FICAC, upon which falls the obligation to apply or enforce the law without fear or favor. Do you think these institutions have met their obligations? Now, I want you to be careful as to how you answer this, because I don't want you to be falling foul of FICAC or some election laws. So be careful, and if you don't want to answer, I can totally understand.
Yeah, thanks, Sasi. I will answer it. I mean, over the years, when I've been in Fiji for more than 3 years now, and I've seen that members of the public have lost a bit of confidence on the police and FICAC for that matter. I always, Sasi, very simply, the police can only act on two occasions. One, there is a report. A report is being lodged and they can investigate. Or two, a crime is taking place and they can intervene. Like I said, the police commissioner does not act on any instruction from anybody else. Okay? And that's why I'm saying, Sasi, that the public generally have lost confidence in these institutions. I'll give you another example, Sasi. I think a few years back, the president of the NFP was giving a press release somewhere in Wainumbukau where they threw some suspect into the river, but he landed on rocks. And he was giving a press conference at the site. And that night at 3 a.m. in the morning, the police raided his home and arrested him. Now the question, Sashi, is for what? What did he commit?
Yes.
He was basically giving a press release. But he was arrested 3 a.m. in the morning, locked up until the 48 hours was about to expire, and then released without a charge being laid. And these are the kind of things, Sashi, that I say has made the public lost confidence in these institutions.
All right. Now, you brought out a relevant example in your paper, The Facade of Democracy, when you wrote, and I quote, "Lately, the FFP members of the government are on countless tours around the country on opening crusades, including the badging of school prefects, that arguably constitutes political campaigning using government resources. Despite the outcry from the opposition, there is not a murmur from those who are empowered to enforce electoral laws. The AG is on record warning opposition parties to abide by electoral laws, and the risk of being hauled in is real." End of quote. That's what you said. This seems to suggest, Dr. Nakarawa, that the independence of institutions who are empowered to enforce laws is compromised. What do you have to say on this?
Yes, Sashi. I mean, that's just a follow-up on what I was saying, Sashi. Because how many times have the opposition members lodged their complaints with FICAC, with police, and nothing happened? And like you're saying, like I said, the ministers are going around opening everything that they can open around the country. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure that out, because that only happens leading up to the election. And that's why I say they're basically campaigning. But the opposition are being stifled through these various laws that they have in place. And yet, when they come up with their views, the institutions that are empowered to police these very laws do not act. They act only when it's done in regards to the opposition. And that's why I'm saying that's us.
All right, and you've also said that where there is no rule of law, there is no democracy. Can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah. That's basically why I said that in a constitutional democracy, merely going through the motions of election is only one small aspect. The fundamental basics required for a democracy, for a functioning democracy, is the rule of law. And when I'm saying the rule of law, it has got to be applied equally. When the laws are applied selectively, then there is no democracy. So we are left with what I've called, we are left with the facade of democracy.
So, Dr. Nakarawa, my next question is where to from here? What is the reality of the situation? How do we bring about a change in that facade, in that charade?
Sashi, I think when I put my hand up and I applied for candidate, it's a candidate. Someone asked me that question, why? What difference can you make? And I said, okay, Sashi, are you still there?
Yes, yes, I am.
Okay. And I said, okay, we are commenting from outside. I'm making running comments over the years, and it seems to be taking no effect on the powers that be. We have seen the opposition in parliament. They have raised points after points after points, but nothing is happening. So for me personally, I realized that to make a change, to be part of the change, you need to go in. There's no other way. The only way forward is to beat this government in the coming election.
So the only way that change can be effected, therefore, is, according to your view, a
Yeah,
change of government. You've got to
a
be
change.
the government to bring about the change.
Yes, sir.
And that would be the change to the rule of law, change to the separation of powers, the
Right,
effective functioning
right.
under the different three sectors. That's what you would advocate.
That is important, Sashi. Very, very important as the way forward. We need a change.
Quite refreshing to hear you speak, Dr. Nakarawa. Uh, Folks, viewers, you are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and if you've just joined us, our chief guest this afternoon is Dr. Jalesi Nakarawa, Doctor of Philosophy in Law and the People's Alliance provisional candidate for the forthcoming general elections. Please share the SSTP page and this interview with family and friends if you can. Don't forget to like and follow the SSTP page as well. Let me now turn our discussion to another paper that you have authored, and this is the article titled The Governmentalization of the Ethiopia Land Trust Board. You wrote that the infamous Sunset Clause, which maligns the cultural autonomy of the Ethiopia, engenders a variety of responses depending on which ethnic or political divide you belong to. The Sunset Clause, Dr. Nakarawa, how has it maligned the cultural autonomy of the Ethiopians?
Sashi, let me just sort of briefly explain what the Sunset Clause entails. I've
Sure.
never read the AG's thesis in all, but I've read a section on the cultural autonomy. He
Dr.
basically said,
Nakarawa,
yeah,
take your time to explain that because I believe that explanation is important.
okay, sure. And the aspect that I read about his thesis basically states that the indigenous cultural autonomy of Itoques should set, no, the sun should set on that autonomy. So, in another sense, he is saying that cultural autonomy should come to an end. Okay? That's what his thesis advocates, Sasi. I did not take much interest in that, Sasi, when it first came, when it first came into public arena. But later on, then I started to have a look at it because of the changes that was happening within the government. And when you talk about cultural autonomy, Sasi, in the case of the Tauke, this is a connection between the land, the sea, interwoven, interconnected into their way of life. The very identity of the Tauke is tied to their land. So when you talk about cultural autonomy with the Taukes, you're talking about much more than just their identity. You're talking about their being, their interconnection with the environment. And over the years, I see they have enjoyed some kind of autonomy. Even under the current, the past governments, they have enjoyed some degree of cultural autonomy. And that came about with the existence of the Itoke affairs. You had the provincial council, the district councils. They had autonomy in the sense that they were not run by the government, per se. They elected their own members and so forth. And likewise, you got the Boselevo Bakaturana Sasi, which was at the top. Although they say that the GCC is a creation of the colonial powers, so be it, but it was there. And the Itoques have adopted it. And over the years, it has played a pivotal and very important role in the affairs of the Itoque. And when you're talking about the Sunset Clause, you're talking about this cultural autonomy coming to an end, which basically means, as in another way you look at it, the nationalization of all these assets. Because you're
Wow.
taking away the cultural autonomy of the Itoque as a people. Okay?
As an Itoke yourself,
Yeah.
how does it make you feel when the cultural autonomy of the Itoke is threatened?
Yes, Sashi, that's why I sort of mentioned, I mean, as an Itoke, I feel helpless because I see the changes taking place. They've taken away the GCC, Sashi,
Hmm.
and they haven't replaced it with anything that the Itoke people can identify with. Okay? Let me just take you to the native land trust board, Sashi. At the head of this board was the GCC, because the GCC appointed members of this board, and this was independent from the government, Sashi. And even if you go back to the previous constitution, Sashi, you had the entrenched provision in that institution that protected the land laws, because it required the majority, or I think it was 2/3 of the Senate to vote for it, and about 2/3 of the Senate members who are appointees of the GCC. That is to allow any change to land laws, to laws dealing with land, Sashi. But that is all gone, Sashi. And at the moment, it's just a majority in parliament will change the laws on land.
Now, you've said the Ethokes have watched with wild bewilderment and a sense of hopelessness. That's what you wrote. And you just mentioned yourself that you feel there's a sense of hopelessness. Why would you feel that? And is it a lost cause? Or do you think that can be retrieved, that cultural autonomy can be retrieved again?
Yes, Sashi, it can be retrieved if we change the government, Sashi, because this government has got a history of not listening. It doesn't really care what we think or what we say, Sashi. They are bent on fulfilling their mission, whatever it is. And I say this, Sashi, because now, in reality, what is happening with land laws, they are changing it, and they want to change it. You got leases now that runs to 99 years, Sashi,
I'm going to
and the
come
land,
to that. I'm
yeah,
just going to come to that in a moment because I have a specific reference to that,
okay,
Dr. Nakarawa.
sure.
So I'm going to stop you there if you don't
Okay,
mind.
yeah.
Um,
It just
yeah, go
and,
on.
and, and yeah, let me just explain this, Sashi. And they have
Sure.
basically now, if you look at the Itoke Land Trust Board, or, I mean, I call it the Native Land Trust Board. Now it's just a department government, Sashi. Even the appointment of the CEO is now come under the Higher Salaries Commission.
Hmm.
So when you look at it, Sashi, the independence of the Native Land Trust Board is gone. It is merely now a department of the government.
So this is the section that you're talking about where the independence of the board, as was reflected in Section 3.1, has been repealed by the current government. And this has impacted on the independence of the board then.
Yes, Sashi. Because previously it was the GCC that appointed members of the board,
Yes.
but they have repealed that and they've replaced the GCC with the Minister of Itoke Affairs. So now the board is decided by the Minister himself.
And who is the Minister of Ethiopian Affairs? Pray do tell.
Yeah, currently now it's the Prime Minister, Mr. Banyamaram.
So it's rather than the GCC making appointments as a collective body,
Yeah,
now it comes down to a one person appointment.
Yes, Sasi. You will recall, Sasi, in just a previous, I think in a meeting, the Naitasiri Provincial Council meeting,
Yes.
Mr. Rinakama, I think from Naitasiri, basically asked the Prime Minister with that question. They wanted representation in that board. And the Prime Minister did not answer that question properly.
Well, I think the Prime Minister said something to the effect, and I stand to be corrected, that why would Naitasiri want representation on the board when he was there as the Minister for Ethiopia, looking after all Ethiopia interests? I think he said that.
Yeah, he said that, Sasi, but the question is how much land does he own personally? When Naitasiri has quite a
Absolutely, yes.
massive area of land and they want representation in that board, Sasi.
Now, I also understand that Section 19 of the Ethiopia Land Act has been amended, as you said, to remove the Great Council of Chiefs as authority to determine customary ownership and its replacement with government authority. So, what is your view on the removal of the chiefly representation first, and your view on government controlling things?
Yeah, I feel, Sasi, that this is, whatever we may say, that it was a creation by the colonial powers, but they have been there for quite some time, and the Toke people as a whole have accepted that. They may need a general alignment, but to me personally, I feel to abolish the GCC, you need to consult the Fijian people themselves, the Toke people themselves. Because the problem with these laws, when you force it down on people, they find themselves helpless, like I'm saying, because they have their own views. And they do not entirely agree with what the government is doing. But what can they do, Sashi? That's why I'm saying that as it case, we feel helpless in the circumstances, Sashi.
Now, Dr. Nakarawa, in your paper, you also wrote that the transition is now complete and the independent ILTB is now effectively a part of government, and that sadly, even before the transition, the then NLTB had been found wanting in its fiduciary duties to landowners. Please explain what you meant by this statement.
Yes, Sashi. Basically, like I said earlier, that the ITLTB board now, Sashi, in all intents and purposes, is merely a department of the Itoke Ministry. Like I said, even the CEO, it has been legislated the salary is decided by the Higher Salaries Commission. And that effectively brings them under the umbrella of the Toke Ministry. And like I said, now this lease money, the lease, how many years the lease will work for, is all over the place. We don't know what is the. Some leases are given for 90 years. Some leases are given for 30 years. And it seems that whatever the government wants to do, it does.
All right, which brings me to a case that you cited in your paper, that case of Tiva v. the Director of Lands, as an example. Would you like to tell us about how the then NLTB had been found wanting in its fiduciary duty to landowners? I find this most interesting.
Yeah, that was an interesting case, Sashi, because this is involves the land that was leased out by the Director of Lands for the mahogany,
Mhm.
where the mahogany can be planted. Okay, and the lease was about 30 years or something. I cannot recall it now. But what happened was actually the Director of Lands requested the ITLTB board to extend the lease to 99 years. That was done, Sashi, and the landowners took that to court because they said that the ITLTB board was overstepping their authority. They extended the lease without consulting them, so they acted against their fiduciary duty, so to speak, Sashi. So the landowners took that case to court and they won the case.
All
The
right,
court,
now,
the case proceeded to the Court of Appeal and they still won it, Sashi. And the ITLTB board was basically told by the court in no uncertain terms that they have overstepped their authority.
Dr. Nakarawa, with your permission, may I just read a few lines of that judgment, with your permission?
Sure, Shashi. Sure.
Now, this was the follow up case, Tiva v. the NLTB case, and the
Yeah.
High Court ruling on that said, and I quote, "The defendant is a statutory body entrusted with the control and administration of native land for the benefit of native owners. The NLTB had granted a lease of 99 years to the Director of Lands, which was then assigned to the Fiji Hardwood Corporation Limited. In granting the 99-year lease, the board had extended its powers as it had no powers to grant a lease in excess of 50 years over unplanned rural areas. The lease was declared void by the Court of Appeal, so the land vested back in the board." Now, let me ask you, how does such an abuse of power by the custodians of Itoke land interests make you feel?
Yes, Shashi. That is basically why I say the importance of the independence of these institutions, Shashi. When these institutions are no longer independent, they are influenced by the powers that be. And in this case, the government basically dictates to the ITLTB board what is to be done. And they did it without realizing that they were basically overstepping the authority.
Okay.
And,
Now, as a result of the case Tiva v. the NLTB, the government removed any obligation for payment of any sum. Again, I find this very odd. Obligation for payment of any sum by a leasee to a lessor for harvesting mahogany. The question is, Dr. Nakarawa, since when does a lessor become subject or subservient to the leasee? Is this not a farce again?
that again, Sashi, is the point I'm driving at, Sashi. It's very interesting to see, and like I said, this government, they have a record of being vindictive. Vindictive in the sense they were reacting because they lost that case. So what do? They go to legislation. Like I said, they rule by law. They legislated a new law to legitimize what they wanted to do. And now they said that the lessor is now subservient to the lessee. And like you said, where in the world do you have that kind of arrangement, Sasi?
Well, you don't, because the lessor is the is the owner. He's the
Right.
big boss,
Yeah.
and the lessee can't be the lessor in the same sense of the word, and that's why I say I find it absolutely shocking and strange. What are your thoughts on Section 15 of the Land Use Act, as this section bars any court or tribunal from hearing any disputes regarding lease conditions?
And that again, Sasi, is basically something I'm saying, This government has got this legacy where they rule by law. Okay, they create these laws to for complainants to take these issues to be addressed by the court. Why do they create those laws to bar this right when the Constitution itself guarantees to individuals that they can go to the court for redress? And the question is, the confusion is, why do they create these laws, Sasi, when we have a constitution that is supposedly supreme? And they come and create these laws with provisions that says that you cannot take this to court. That is the confusion, Sasi, in the system we have at the moment.
Would I be correct in assuming that because the government have deep pockets of the taxpayers' money, they can make amendments, they can bring new legislation, and unfortunately, people, if they need to seek redress, have to come up with a big amount of money to seek legal redress, and that is one of the things that is perhaps stopping a number of court challenges in sorts of actions like this.
Very true, Sashi. I totally agree with you. There is a lot of cases around that can be taken to court for redress, Sashi. But who will take it to court? Because it costs a lot of money, Sashi. Yeah?
Now, you've mentioned the Great Council of Chiefs. Would you like to see that august body being reconstituted?
Personally, Sashi, I believe whatever happens to the GCC, the Itoke people should be consulted and they should decide for themselves whether they want the GCC to be reconvened or not. That's
All
what I
right.
believe in, Sashi.
And would you have any views on whether the GCC should be constituted in the same manner in which it used to in the past, or the GCC's modus operandi or its functions ought to be re-looked at?
Yes, Sashi, I guess under the circumstances, if the Itoke people wanted to be recalled, it can be recalled. But certainly it needs to be addressed, Sashi, the way it's configured, given
Yes.
what we have gone through so far and the development that the country is in now. But like I said, the important thing is to get the consensus of the people involved, the Itoke people, and then they can move forward from there, Sashi. But certainly, if there is need for reconfiguring their role and their authority, so be it, Sashi.
So you've just word two very, very important words which are not used in Fiji mostly these days. And those two words are consensus and consultation. And
Yes.
you've summed it up so nicely by saying that the Etho-K people will have to have consensus, but they'll
Mm.
have to be consulted with first. And I like that. Thank you
Mm.
very much for bringing that to the forefront. You are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest this afternoon is Dr. Jalesi Nakarawa, Doctor of Philosophy in Law and the People's Alliance provisional candidate for the forthcoming elections. Please like, follow, and share the SSTP page if you can. I now move to another article that you wrote, and in an open access publication from the Law Brigade Publishers, I found an article of yours titled The Spectre of Ouster Clauses, the Deportation of the University of the South Pacific Chancellor from Fiji. I would like to discuss this with you now, Dr. Nakarawa. Firstly, for the benefit of our viewers, can you please explain what is an ouster clause?
Yes, Shashi. An ouster clause is basically a provision, Shashi, that is normally inserted in legislation that purports or tries to limit the powers of the court to review certain decisions made under that legislation, Shashi. So it's basically a clause or provision that limits the powers of the court to
All
review
right.
any decision made under that law.
So, when we look at the deportation of the University of the South Pacific Vice Chancellor, Professor Pal Aluwalia, now perhaps the precursor to that was a paper written by Professor Pal Aluwalia, which was titled the White Paper. Do you have any background on that white paper?
Yes, Shashi. My understanding is that Professor Paul basically came in and did an investigation and he titled it the white paper. The investigation basically identified the various anomalies happening with the University of the South Pacific. And unfortunately for us, Shashi, the majority of the people implicated in that investigation were Fiji citizens. And, uh, and that's where the conflict basically started, Shashi.
The white paper also focused um, within the University of the South Pacific a wide range of corruption issues. Was that not also part of that?
Yeah, that's basically what I said. Most of the people, you know, who were involved in those allegations were Fiji citizens. And
Right.
it was basically he highlighted the very corruptive practices going on. And because they were mainly from appointees of the Fiji government there was a great fallout from that.
Okay, and then that was followed by a BDO report, What is known of this BDO report?
Yeah, it's basically such it was an attempt to sort of address the issues raised in the white paper. Because, like I said, most of the people implicated in that investigation by the vice chancellor were Fiji citizens, and they were holding positions of influence within the USP. So they came to the consensus that an independent authority was to be brought in to investigate the allegations, and that's why the BDO report came in. They came in, they investigated, but the investigation, I don't know why it was kept secret. It was not released. The powers that be decided that it be best to keep it secret.
Yes, indeed. While the BDO report has remained confidential, excerpts disclosed from New Zealand reveal names of senior academics and staff concerned who are
Right.
closely linked to people in high authority within the Fiji government. Now, despite this, there was a counter report by the Risk and Audit Committee. However, the University Council has stood by the professor. Now, your paper discussed prohibited immigrant notice. What can you tell us about the prohibited immigrant notice, citing Section 13(2)(g) of the Immigration Act 2003?
Interestingly, Sasi, during the height of this saga, so to speak, the University Council found out that there was a clause on the Vice Chancellor's employment agreement that
Mm.
stated that in the event his work permit is not granted, he will lose his job. While the conflict was going on, the University Council found that out. So they were working on addressing that clause. While they were working on that, the Fiji government beat them to it. And
Mm.
that's why they revoked his work permit. And they cited the clause that I'm telling you, Sasi. The
Yes.
sad part of it, Sasi, like I'm saying, this is why the public have lost confidence in the rule of law in Fiji. Okay? Because the absence of following proper processes. Okay? If you look at the section that is highlighted there, Sasi, that section basically it's a notification notifying the person concerned that his work permit has been revoked. It is not a deportation order per se. It is a notice notifying the person that his permit has been revoked.
But in this instance, that notice, the prohibited immigration notice, immigrant notice, it acted as a deportation order because in the darkness of night, Professor Pala Lualia and his wife were more or less dragged and taken to the Nandi International Airport and then put on the next flight out to Sydney.
Yes, Shashi, and that is the sad part of it, Shashi. It was only a notification, but it was used as a deportation order, and they were treated like a normal Shashi, with about 15 people going in to get them out of the house, and they were escorted in double quick time to Nandi Airport and put on the next plane. What was the hurry about, Shashi? Why weren't they given the opportunity to actually reply to the notice as
Yes,
required by law, Shashi?
yes. I mean, natural justice didn't prevail in that instance. Now, Dr. Nakarawa, was this case of the deportation of Professor Pala Lualia a first time revelation of the specter of ouster clauses in Fiji?
Yes, Sashi, that's why I took an interest in it, and that's why I wrote that article, basically because I thought this was the first time the specter of ouster clauses came forward, you know. To be frank, Sashi, let me just explain it. If you go to the Immigration Act or whatever the act of, I think it's the Deportation Act, if I remember correctly,
Mm-hmm.
the notice that they served is the trigger to the deportation process. Okay? Because when that notice is given, the person receiving the notice has two options. One, they can prepare their own stuff, prepare to leave the country willingly. Or two, they can prepare to defend the allegation. Okay, because the second process in that deportation process, Sasi, is for them to appear, and that should be in that notice. If you go to the act, they should appear before a magistrate to explain their position, but that was not done. Sasi. The court is the final arbiter that decides, okay, you have breached this and you are going to leave the country. That's where the deportation order comes in, Sasi. Not the notification that was used on that night.
You have argued in your paper that and I quote, that the dubious character of actions taken to enforce deportation creates uncertainty over the scope of the ouster clause, given that the prohibited immigrant notice is prima facie devoid of justice and due process. End of quote. So let me ask you, how do we reconcile such an action if it is devoid of justice and due process?
Yes, Sashi, if you read that article, that's basically what I was trying to explain. Because the ouster clause, as it is, it's trying to prevent the authority of the courts to deal with these complaints. But similar to the veil, if you look at the company's laws, you've got a veil of secrecy that keeps the directors behind the veil. But in the cases where they breach their fiduciary duties as director, the term they use is normally they lift the veil. They lift the veil, and the directors become liable for whatever it was they did, breaking their fiduciary duties. And my argument is that, Sasi, the ouster clause should be treated similarly. Because if you don't, the ouster clause cannot make an unlawful decision lawful, Sasi. That's my whole argument. If a decision is unlawful, it is unlawful. And no ouster clause can make it lawful, Sasi. And that's why I'm arguing, because this is an accepted norm in common law jurisdictions, that ouster clauses cannot protect unlawful decisions. And that's where the inherent role of the High Court comes in.
In your paper, you cited the Court of Appeal decision in 100 Sands Limited, the casino company, v. the Attorney General of Fiji. What did the Court of Appeal ruling say on this subject?
Yes, Sashi, because when I was actually reviewing the Vice Chancellor from USP's case, I basically came across the 100 cents case. And I realized that that ouster clause has been used previously. So the whole point, Sashi, is that the Court of Appeal, I found that very interesting. The Court of Appeal did not have to consider the effectiveness of that ouster clause, but they did. And with due respect, Sashi, this was the whole bench of the Court of Appeal.
Yes.
But they decided to review the powers of the High Court. I'm not sure why they decided to do it, but they did. Because in the High Court, while the case was in the High Court ruled that it had jurisdiction to hear the case. The argument revolved around the provision in the Constitution, Sashi, that says no decision made under any of these decrees can be challenged by any court, but it had a time period from, I forgot the date, Sashi, but it had a time period from here to the first day the Parliament convenes. Okay? And arguably, Sashi, that is understandable because we were transitioning from dictatorial rule, so to speak, to parliamentary democracy. And in the transition, all the laws that were in place, the decisions, the decrees, they had to be protected. And that's why that was in the Constitution. They cannot be challenged. But once Parliament sits, and then the decisions that made after Parliament sits can be reviewed by the courts. That was the ruling by the High Court. But unfortunately, the Court of Appeal decided otherwise. They decided that clause prevents any decision whatsoever from being taken to court.
I believe from memory that initial time frame was from 2006 after the coup, when
Yeah,
the decree started coming out. And as
right.
you say, to the first day of Parliament's sitting in the new Parliament. In the face of the Court of Appeal decision, Dr. Nakarawa, what are the alternatives? I mean, you have suggested that it is highly probable that the decision to invoke the powers of the Minister for Immigration was done with malice and impunity in the knowledge that the decision was protected from judicial review. So, what are the alternatives?
Yeah, that's the risk we run, Sasi, if we are not careful with ouster clauses, because it can be used with impunity. It can be used by administrators, by decision makers, knowing that whatever decision they make is protected under those clauses. And that's the risk that we run if we are not careful with ouster clauses, Sasi. And, uh, and I'm saying that it was done by impunity because it appears to me because they had experienced that, because the government knew that the ouster clause case was addressed in the 100 cents case and the vice chancellor of the Fiji University. So they
Right.
had a good understanding of the ouster clauses being accepted by the court. Okay, so arguably, when they made the decision against Professor Paul, they knew that it was protected. Okay, that's the risk I'm saying, Sasi, of making an unlawful decision lawful.
In making that unlawful decision lawful, then what steps should be taken to open it for judicial review? I mean, right now, it's not
Yeah.
open.
If you read that article I wrote, Sasi, there
Mm,
are three ways of interpreting legal statutes.
yes.
And if you look at that ruling by the High Court, it basically applied the literal rule. They just read the meaning of the provision as it was, and they applied the time limitation, like you said, from the coup to the first day Parliament sits. And when you read that provision, Sashi, you'll have to agree with the High Court that
Mm,
the
yes.
literal rule basically applies because you just read it and you apply it as it is. But interestingly, the High Court, when it said to consider that, it decided that was wrong. So
Mm,
they applied the mischief rule, Sashi. But the mischief rule, Sashi, only applies if that provision is so ambiguous it's difficult to ascertain the intent of that provision. And that's where the mischief rule applies, Sashi. So what it effectively means, the mischief rule basically means that you consider what the provision was trying to prevent. Okay?
mm,
And that's how the Court of Appeal, the bench of Court of Appeal ruled. They ruled that the provision was trying to prevent any decision whatsoever from being
mm,
taken to court. And I found that I found that quite unbelievable, Sasi. Because if you read my article, I actually brought forward another argument, an alternative argument. I said the best way to address that was the third rule of interpretation, which they normally call the golden rule, which is basically to take the whole scheme of the act being analyzed. Okay, so in this sense, if you look back at my article, I basically noted that the provision they were talking about is actually titled transitional. Okay, that's the title
yes.
of the section, which basically means supports what I'm saying. It was introduced to facilitate the transition from ruling by decree to parliamentary democracy. Okay? And if you go back to the Constitution itself, Sasi, if you go back to Section 100, if I remember correctly, it states that the High Court has original jurisdiction, inherent jurisdiction to hear any dispute under the Constitution or under any court or under
Yes.
any
Yes.
law. Okay? So where do we stand, Sasi, in all this confusion? Okay?
All right. Let me get your views on some functions of Parliament. I mean, since we're talking of the rule of law, etc., this might be a good point to bring Standing Order 51 into discussion.
Yeah.
As you know, Standing Order 51 is being used to rush bills through Parliament. What are your views on Standing Order 51?
Yeah, thank you, Sasi. Firstly, Sasi, I just want to focus on, Parliament has got three basic functions, so to speak. One, legislative, they make laws. Okay, and two, they are custodians of public finances, because that's where they decide the finances. That's where they discuss. So they are custodians of. And three, they are basically responsible for electoral system, the election, so to speak. That's what parliamentary system is all about. Okay, and if you take their roles, those roles can only be realized if there is consultation, it's open, transparent discussions, debate, call it what may you may, such. And Rule 51, so to speak, it's there for a purpose. It's there to meet emergencies. Okay, but when you begin using that rule almost every time you want to introduce laws, you begin to wonder what kind of parliament we have.
As you said, it was there for emergency purposes,
Yeah.
but these days, in the function of everyday parliament, Standing Order 51 is used to expedite just about every legislator, every bill
Yes.
in parliament.
Yes.
So,
And
go on.
it's become a norm now, Sasi. It's like it's a norm now that this government is introduced, that they pass legislation through this. And the sad part is that because that prevents the public from being informed of debates, discussions on the law being discussed, Sasi. And I may say this, Sasi, because law is an effective tool for social change, but with a caveat that it's got to be accepted by the people, Sasi. If it's not accepted by the people, I doubt it will achieve the purpose they set it out to achieve.
I find another thing quite distressing at times. In the old setup of Fiji's parliament, we had constituencies where a member of parliament could go back to his constituency and get the view of his people. Fiji now, in the Dion system, has just one national constituency. And when a bill is being brought up in Fiji's parliament for debate and then rushed through using Standing Order 51, it certainly does not allow a member of parliament to have sufficient time to go back to his people to seek their views on the passing, or rather on the voting of that particular legislature. What are your views? Am I correct in what I'm saying?
No, you're correct, Sasi, and I truly support what you're saying. Because as it is now, Sasi, most of the laws they have passed, very few people understand that, Sasi. And I mean, even me included, because I have to go back to look at what were the laws passed, because there was no time given for public consultation, for the first reading, for the second reading, and the third reading if need be. But now they are rushing it with only 1 hour time allowed for debate. So most of these laws are being passed such that nobody knows what the laws are about until you really take your time to go in and look at it at your own time size.
It's an expedient process, just like a processing mill. Processing plant just plows the bills out, as in a factory. I mean, as we've all observed, Dr. Nakarawa, in Fiji's parliament these days, there is voting by acclamation. Do you think this type of voting is conducive to effective parliamentary processes, or does it leave a lot to be desired? I mean, look at what happened with Dr. Neil Sharma when he voted against a government motion, for instance. What are your views?
Yes, my view, Sashi, there is no place for automation in Parliament because it stifles the freedom of parliamentarians to vote according to their conscience or according to party lines or whatever, Sashi. Because when voting by acclamation happens, it takes away those freedom to actually vote according to what you think is correct, Sashi. And we have no idea who supports it, who doesn't, when they when they when they are doing that such in parliament. And I don't agree with the way they do it.
All right. We've touched on this before as we were discussing one of your earlier articles. That's on the subject of consultative process. What of the consultative process in Parliament? In many governments in the world, there is bipartisan support in Parliament on certain issues that affect the nation as a whole. Do you think the spirit of consultation exists in the current Fijian Parliament and with the current Fiji First government?
No, it doesn't exist, Sashi. Let me just show you an example. You know the Public Accounts Committee?
Hmm.
Every government since independence, that committee has always been chaired by the opposition.
Yes.
That basically to ensure this consultative processes, to give it some kind of transparency. But now, what they did, they basically took that away. They changed the rules and now they appoint. So where is the transparency, Sashi?
Non-existent.
Yeah, that's basically the problem, Sashi. They don't consult and they don't worry about consensus. They do what they want to do. And like I said, they are so used to ruling by law, Sashi, to legitimize whatever it is they want to put in place.
Which brings me to your first point, democracy being a facade.
That is basically it, Sashi.
Dr. Nakarawa, I would now like to shift our discussion to the Fiji military's role. Now, enshrined in the 2013 Constitution under Section 131(2), it is stated that, and I quote, "It shall be the overall responsibility of the Republic of the Fiji Military Forces to ensure at all times the security, defense, and well-being of Fiji and all Fijians." What are your views on this particular section of the Constitution and the powers and responsibilities provided to the military?
Yes, Sashi, that provision is contentious at the very
Hmm.
least, Sashi. Because while people are talking about this provision, they are reading into what the provision means, Sashi. But what the provision means can only be decided by a court, Sashi. But for me personally, when I look at that provision, I take security and defense together, Sashi.
Yes.
Because if you look at various governments, they have defense and security policies as a foreign policy. Okay? To be, just to simplify it, Sashi, the role of the military, any military, to stand in Fiji and look outwards. They don't stand in Fiji and look inwards. No, that's not defense. Okay? When you're talking about the military, their core role is that they stand in Fiji and they look outwards to regional security, whatever it is, not
Yes.
internal security, Sashi. So my argument is that that provision, until the court decides what it means, I take it that's what it means, my personal views on it. Because you've got to link it with security and defense. So when you're talking about security and defense, you're talking about borders, you're talking about regional security. And
Yes.
until a court rules on that, Sashi, that's basically the way I look at it, Sashi.
Well, I don't think anyone's rushing to court to seek a legal interpretation of that right now.
Yeah.
We are left with that provision in the Constitution, and some have expressed their concerns, their apprehensions. Now, can this section be seen? Can this be seen as a section that may allow another interference or coup in the event there's a change in government? I mean, it says well-being of all Fijians.
Yeah, and like I said, Sashi, because that provision is that those words are not defined in the Constitution. Okay, and like I said, for me, I look at it as a combination of security and defense.
Mm.
So you cannot say that the role of security is internal security, looking inwards, like I said. Okay, that's my. But the funny thing is this, Sashi. Does that provision provide for some powers within the commander? That is the question. Okay, there is no discretionary powers in that provision itself, because if you look at the Constitution, where emergency power comes in, then the police commissioner comes in. Okay, the police commissioner in consultation with the commander, they advise the Prime Minister for an emergency.
Yes,
So,
that's covered under that's covered under section 154
yeah,
1,
right.
which states that the Prime Minister may, on the recommendation of the Commissioner of Police and the Commander of the Republic of the Fiji Military Forces, declare a state of emergency in Fiji or part of Fiji, and may make regulations to a state of emergency if there are reasonable grounds to believe A. The security and safety of all or part of Fiji is threatened, or B. It is necessary to declare a state of emergency to deal effectively with the threatening circumstances. So go on, please.
Yes, Sashi. I mean, that's basically when you look at emergency powers, it's in that section. That's my
Yes.
argument that the section you quoted regarding the role of the military, does it really have any inherent power? Does it place inherent powers on the commander? It doesn't. It just says that their role is to ensure that. That's why I'm saying it's arguable the way you interpret that provision. Because people are beginning to think that that provision deals with internal security, but I beg to differ. I beg to say, because the role of any military is basically looking outward, never looking inwards.
I like that explanation of yours that the role of the military is to look outwards,
Yeah,
the protection of its borders,
yeah,
protection of its international water rights, and that's the bigger picture and
right.
not an inward looking military.
No.
The question that is very important, I guess, is this: who exercises or invokes emergency powers if the crisis is caused by the government itself?
Yes, that is the interesting part, Sas, because I think I wrote that in one of my articles. Because in some systems, like in France and Germany, they have provisions for that, where they can appoint someone to act as a dictator for a period of time to protect institutions and the system. But we don't have that in Fiji, Sas. And the argument is that the discussion that was happening, because we are heading down, the economic collapse of the country and all that, people were beginning to cite that provision for the military to step in. But personally, I don't think that provision allows for the military to step in.
Because I was just going to raise this with you, because herein lies a very interesting scenario, I think,
Yeah,
under the Section 154(2) provision that I just quoted, just read out. Remember, it is on the recommendation of the Commissioner of Police
yeah,
and the Commander of the Republic of the Fiji Military Forces that the Prime Minister could declare a state of emergency. However, given the provision of Section 131(2),
yeah.
do you think the Commander of the Fiji Military Forces will have sufficient powers not to back any call by the PM for a state of emergency? In other words, can the commander of the Republic of the Fiji Military Forces make a call, make a stand, and say, no, for the well being of all Fijians, we don't need a so called state of emergency?
Yes, that's an interesting point, Sasi, and it remains to be seen, okay? Because at the moment, like I said, because in cases of emergency, the first actor that normally is called upon to decide is the Commissioner of Police, because he is the one responsible with internal security. That's why I was saying that the military always looks outward, not inward, because the police is here to ensure internal security. And that's why if you see at the cases of emergency, he is the first actor that comes in,
Hmm.
because he will have to recommend. I'm not sure what the word says, whether in consultation or whether the commander needs to also recommend. And that's where the tricky bit comes in, whether the commander can pull out from that recommendation, or and what happens
It
after that.
says the key words are under Section 154(1) states that the Prime Minister may, on the recommendation, though that's the key word, on the recommendation.
Yeah.
So it comes to reason that should that not be a recommendation in moving forward, because it says, remember, it's not one or the other.
On the
The statutory part says the recommendation of the Commissioner of Police and
and the commander.
the Commander of the Republic of the
Sure.
Military Forces. That is why I raised that very interesting
Yeah,
hypothetical scenario that
sure.
whilst one may make that recommendation, and if the other, acting upon his good conscience and his
Yeah.
belief in the good Lord, decide not to carry out a course of action that may be to the detriment of the nation, then we have a situation where what happens?
Yes, Sasi. And I guess in that case, the buck stops with the Prime Minister, Sasi.
Well, the buck stops with the prime minister, but then the the, the commander is the person who is in charge of his troops, and
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
yeah, go on.
that's an assumption I'm making, Sasi, given that the commander is basically returned to barracks with the military. They are in barracks.
Yes. All right, now, viewers, you are watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest this afternoon is Dr. Jalesi Nakarawa, Doctor of Philosophy in Law and the People's Alliance Provisional Candidate. Please share the SSTP page and this interview with family and friends if you can. Don't forget to like and follow the SSTP page as well. Um, this is one interview that I'm really, really enjoying, Dr. Nakarawa.
Thank you, Sasi.
The whole concept of law being undressed, and you are doing it in such a wonderful style, and I thank you for that. Just hope that an interview of this nature, particularly with you explaining things, hopefully, perhaps your party may want to translate this into the Itoke language. It is very important for discussion in the national landscape of Fiji. Now, let me take the discussion to talk about the due process of law that exists or perhaps does not exist in Fiji. For example, I said to you earlier, we'll come back to the Solicitor General's case. And
Sure.
at this juncture, I'd like to discuss the termination of the Solicitor General. I remind you and myself that the matter is still in court. So let us not talk about the court case itself, but
Yep.
discuss the due process of law. Now, do you think the due process of law was followed in this particular instance?
Yeah, unfortunately, Sasi, I think in one of the articles I basically mentioned that of all the cases that basically point to to the erosion of the rule of law, this one takes the cake for me, Sasi, the Solicitor General. Because it's interesting, Sasi, because prior to this, I mean, the permanent secretaries and the directors and you name it, they came in and they went out almost within the blink of an eye, whatever the excuse they give. But in this case, they made a wrong move, Sasi. They made a wrong turn because the Solicitor General is a constitutional office. And his appointment and his termination is there in the Constitution. And it's interesting, Sashi, because if you look at the Constitution, it says he can be removed for various, and one of them is misbehavior. Okay,
Yes.
so let's assume he was removed of misbehavior. So what was the misbehavior, Sashi? Okay, he
Okay.
he was doing his role. He performed in court whatever it was, but was there a misbehavior? But if it was a misbehavior, then there's a process. A tribunal had to be called and tribunal had to hear the thing, and then the recommendation will be made. But was that followed, Sashi? This is why I'm saying this is the kind of action that erodes our confidence in the rule of law and in these constitutional institution offices that are supposed to limit the powers of government.
Therein lies the problem of natural justice being followed,
Yes,
or rather the lack of it. Now, we touched on the separation of powers earlier. In the same case of the former Solicitor General Sharvada Sharma, it is now a matter of public record that the PM gave instructions for the dismissal. Is the separation of powers in this instance, do you think, being abused by the current government?
Yes, Sasi. That's not only an abuse of the separation of powers, Sasi, but the Prime Minister himself was actually overstepping his authority. He doesn't have any authority to remove the Solicitor General, so to speak, Sasi. That's the bottom line. He doesn't have any authority to remove the Solicitor General.
And like I said, there is a due process, and it's actually articulated in writing as
In the
to what the
Constitution.
process is in the Constitution.
Yeah.
And if I take you to the very first part of our interview, the Constitution, I asked you, what's the objective? And I think you mentioned it's the supreme law of the state, the supreme law of the land. So therein lies another issue in terms of the separation of powers and the abuse of powers. Because on one hand, if it's easy for a proponent of the government to pick up the 2013 Constitution and say, this is the law that we follow, then on the other hand, one abuses that same law, then it brings me to your point again, dictatorship.
Right. And that's why I call it the facade of democracy, Sasi.
Very apt title, very nicely titled, I must say that, Dr. Nakarawa. Let me ask you about your views on trial by media. I'll give you an example in a moment. Here in Australia, and I can cite New Zealand as well, I've lived there for a number of years. When there is a crime committed, etc., people are not brought front and center until such time they are fully charged, etc., and due process of law has been carried out. My question to you is on trial by media in Fiji. For instance, if something happens, you have the alleged perpetrator's photograph, bang center, and there is big media write-ups. What are your views on trial by media? Example could be the case in Lambasa of lawyer Amrit Sen, for instance.
Yes, I think, Sasi, it boils down to public confidence on the independence of these institutions, Sasi. Like I said, over the years, the public has lost confidence in institutions like police and FICAC. And what happens, Sasi, when something happens like that, people are so used now to falling back on social media because of the way the media has been controlled over time, Sasi. But social media has got no such control, Sasi. And unfortunately, and sadly, so to speak, this is the reaction, the public reaction. I may not agree with it, Sasi. I don't agree with the way they do it. But unfortunately, this is the reality. Because they are so immersed in they want to see action by police and fair action, justice to be applied, like I said, because the rule of law should apply equally to everybody. And when they lost that confidence, they actually jumped the gun, so to speak. They fall back on social media, and there you go, trial by media, like you said, Sasi. Well, I don't agree with it, unfortunately, Sasi. This is the way it has developed in Fiji.
Yes.
It is unfortunate. Yeah.
You recently wrote that selective justice serves no justice, rather, it sponsors injustice. It contradicts the principle of equality before the law and makes the application of the rule of law difficult. You said this on the backdrop of the Minister for Women's condemnation regarding an inmate who was allowed to play rugby for the Warden Sevens team. Please explain what you meant by the words selective justice.
Yes, when I said that, Sashi, because in this instance, there was this rugby player that was released to play rugby, and there was an outcry from the minister. But in previous cases, there were prisoners who had gone through the same system, but it was never highlighted. Okay? And I can name them, but I don't want to name them, Sashi.
Sure.
But the point is that this has got to be applied across the board, just to be fair. Okay, and let me just point this out, Sashi. You know, it always sort of it it makes me think when I hear the Attorney General. Like recently, the Attorney General said that political parties need to account for everybody attending a function. Okay, my concern, Sashi, is this: he is first and foremost the Attorney General, and as such, he is the chief legal advisor to the government. He is not an enforcer of the law. And I guess such my problem with that is this: he is wearing too many hats. Okay,
Mhm.
because if you look at New Zealand, Australia, the US, in common law jurisdictions, you will see that the Attorney General wears only one hat,
That's right.
because first and foremost, he is the chief legal advisor. And the concern is that while he is speaking, he may be speaking in other capacities, but people look at him as the Attorney General. And that carries a lot of weight, Sashi. And that's why I'm saying selective justice in the sense that what he is saying applies to the opposition. But how about the Fiji First Party? Who enforces that? When the opposition members make a complaint, who enforces that? And that is the irony of it, Sashi. And that's why I'm sort of frustrated with the whole system that we have in Fiji.
You mentioned the example of Western democracies. For example, in Australia, the leader of the political party is, of course, the leader. For example, Mr. Albanese is the leader of the Labour Party. He's the prime minister right now. However, the uh, the actual political party itself will be managed by people outside of Parliament. Now, in Fiji's instance, like you said, he is someone wearing a number of hats, a number of different ministerial portfolios, as well as being the Attorney General, and as well as being the Secretary General of a political party. Does that raise a problem in terms of dealing with a clear demarcation line with issues of the party on one side and with issues of governance on the other side?
Yes, Sasi. I think the classical example is his recent letter to the supervisor of election.
Yes.
If you look at the letter he wrote as the general secretary of the Fiji First Party, but unfortunately, he is also the minister responsible for election. And the conflict comes out like a sore thumb process. And not only that, he's the minister responsible for election, and he's also the attorney general. But the power of that letter he wrote, you know, that will force the office bearers to act, because although he is writing as the secretary of the Fiji First Party, but he is also the minister responsible for election, and he's also the attorney general. So the letter carries a little more a different weight from a complaint given by the opposition members of parliament, or the opposition politicians, so to speak. Says.
Something just dawned in my mind. Do you think you've made yourself a target now that you've appeared on this program?
Yeah, maybe such is so be it, but I mean, I'm happy that I'm able to share it, Sashi. But that is my perception. It's not a party position. It's my personal perception of what
Sure.
is happening in Fiji. Sashi.
And let's move now to election and issues. I would like to now discuss the forthcoming election with you. What do you think should be the main election theme for you and your party?
Yes, Shashi, I think at the moment, if you look at all the writings I've done, I have always written on issues, Shashi. I don't want to touch on personal vilifications or parties or whatever it is. I always speak on issues. And hopefully, my hope is that I'm trying to show people that it's better to talk about issues rather than talking about people and talking about parties per se. And the issue now, if you go around Sashi, my experience of going around Suva and in the islands, people want a change. Sashi. There's no two ways about it. Everybody wants a change. They have simply had enough, Sasi.
And this cry for change, do you think it's going to really materialize into votes on election day, whenever that is?
Yes, unfortunately, Sasi, for the opposition, there are just too many parties.
I was
Too
coming
many
to
parties.
that.
Yeah.
I was
And
about
then,
to come to that. Go on.
yeah, yeah. It's almost. I'm really at a loss to explain why we have so many parties, Sasi. Because the theme is, I mean, everybody agrees we need a change. But let us be realistic, Sasi. I said when I was joining politics, I was pragmatic about it. I don't want to join politics, Sasi, to be in the opposition because nothing happens when you are in the opposition. You want to join politics to make it to government and implement changes that will benefit the people of Fiji. There's no two ways about it. I'm not entering politics just to be in the opposition benches. And
Yes.
that is the reality of it. Okay? But then these people, they want changes too, but they are forming new parties left, right, and center. Sasi. But do they sit down? I'm wondering whether do they sit down and actually assess realistically whether they can meet the 5% threshold. So the point, Sasi, I'm driving at is now it's up to the people themselves. If
Mhm.
you want change, you vote for a party that you know can make it.
You've just mentioned smaller parties, the impact that smaller parties will have. As you said, some may not even get across the threshold. Now, is this a disaster in the making, or the whole essence here would be for people to make a very solid determination as to how best they can utilize their one single vote? What are your views?
That is my view, Sashi. I totally agree with you. The important thing is for people to make an informed decision about their one vote. Make it count, Sashi. Because I accept there are people out there who are who can make very good leaders and they can make good parliamentarians or may make good ministers. But the reality is that they belong to parties that are just too small to make it to the threshold. And my advice to people out there, Sashi, make this count. You do this only once in 4 years. And this time make sure that they sit down and they think about the realities of it and they make their vote count.
All right, because they only have one vote, and that's
One
a
vote.
very, very important vote.
Yeah.
And I would also think that there has to be a concerted effort on the part of the electorate to make that concerted effort to turn up on election day to vote, whether it takes 4 hours in the queue or whether it takes 10 minutes or 5 minutes. The important thing is to have your say in choosing your next government, because the government the people of Fiji will choose this time around will be a government of their choice. So there can't be any excuses. As they say, you can't cry over spilt milk. Now, Dr. Nakarawa, are you at all concerned about the elections being free and fair, or do you have faith in the system? Please be careful, because again, I don't want you to get in trouble in answering this question from the supervisor of elections office if something goes astray. You can bypass the question if you want.
Well, so, so. I mean, the election is happening, and I'm not really into saying that the election is not fair. But what I'm saying is that my title of my article is the facade of democracy, and I said let us not to kid ourselves. Let us see what is happening. And at the moment, the election process is basically unfair, Sasi, because they have introduced laws that stifles the attempt by the opposition. And that, from the outset, makes the whole process unfair. It's loaded against the opposition. But be that as it may, we have no choice. We just have to go for it.
Which brings me to another point. When you talk about the election process being unfair, For example, if we look at that section 116, where parties, political parties, and SODELPA have been taken to task for that. In that interpretation, who determines? Let me just, backtrack here for our viewers' benefit. That section 116 again is what we've been talking about in recent times. That if a party mentions a policy issue, they've got to, and the word is immediately, back it up by saying how they're going to fund it. Now, who determines the interpretation of the word immediately? When is immediate? I don't know. It's not interpreted in that. Am I correct in that, Dr. Nakarawa?
Yeah, you're correct, Sashi. And I think, Sashi, I was driving at that when I was talking earlier because
Yes.
whenever the AG makes a comment, and it basically impacts on how people perceive these laws. Okay? And if he's adding to what is already in the act, people will take it and that it is a fact. And and let me just show you an example, Sashi. I think a few months back, someone actually approached me, and I knew he was a member of the Fiji First Party, so to speak. He asked me, Sashi, will your party continue with free education? I said, yeah, of course. And the next question was, where do you get the funds from?
Hmm.
So you see, and I said, what do you think? We are going to fundraise? Because wherever the allocation is coming from with the current
Yeah.
government, that's where we will continue with it. I mean, these are the kind of questions they are beginning to ask us, which is basically unfair because we are not in government. We are not privy to how the allocations have been managed over the years. While they can fall back on the government machinery to provide them with costing, we are on the outside. And
Yes.
that kind of question such is basically what I'm saying. When they ask me where you going to get the money, where you going to get the funds from, I said, well, wherever the government is getting the fund from. I mean, it's come down to that kind of stupidity, such so to speak, if I may say so.
Yeah, you can say so. In this program, you can call someone stupid if they are stupid, and if they act stupid. Stupid is, stupid is.
Yeah.
Now, let me ask you, do you think the public in Fiji that they can perceive that politically it is not a level playing field?
They do, Sashi, they do. I mean, I've been going around. When I go to people, Sashi, in this campaign period, I tell them the most important thing for you to do is register to vote. And the second one, make sure you go and vote. Whether it's raining or whether it's hurricane, go there and vote. And and they know, Sashi, they know that it's not a playing level thing.
Hmm. Okay. All right. You're watching Sashi Singh's Talking Point, and our chief guest this afternoon is Dr. Jalesi Nakarawa, Doctor of Philosophy in Law and provisional candidate for the People's Alliance Party. Please like and share the page if you can, the SSTP page. And if you do so, that's when you will get all instantaneous notifications that we post on the SSTP page. And to all our viewers this afternoon, thank you very much for being part of episode 24 with Dr. Jalesi Nakarawa. And I can see some of the comments, great debates being uh, conducted via the comments section of the SSTP page. Dr. Nakarawa, let us look at social issues that affect the people in Fiji. What do you think are the major areas or issues of great concern that is of concern to the population, rather? What are the issues?
I think, Sashi, one of the most pressing issues at the moment is the state of our medical services. Sashi. There is no two ways about it. People are disillusioned by the state of our medical institutions. The services, the equipment, the infrastructure, they are all falling apart, Sashi. And that is the most important thing that needs to be done. And of course, secondly, Sashi, the ability of the government to repay the debts that keep piling up. So whichever government comes into office, they have their hands full in tackling that, Sashi.
I would like to ask you what can be done to address these issues, but I'm very mindful that the moment you start addressing these issues, you will be targeted in terms of costings, and
Yes.
that will jeopardize your candidature. So I will leave that there. But you've just mentioned health, you've mentioned the debt crisis. Do you think that's where the priorities are? What about poverty?
Yes, Sashi. I think the debt crisis comes with poverty.
Yes.
Because of the debt crisis, prices keep going up, the import and all that comes with it, Sashi. And it needs to be addressed if we are to alleviate poverty and the social problems that we have with it, Sashi.
All right, now, given the current debt situation in Fiji, what do you think of the current government's performance? I believe I've also seen in the Fiji media yesterday another loan being taken by the government.
Yes, Sashi. I mean, that's. I always wondered why they keep doing that, Sashi. But I guess at the end of the day, they just don't have any money. They have run out of options. The only option they have now, the only way they know how to operate now, is to keep obtaining loans, Sashi. And that's the sad reality of the way the government has been going.
Now, if there is a change in government, what do you think an incoming government should do to address the current debt situation? Again, mindful of the costings
Yeah,
danger.
I guess that's firstly they need to look at where they can save costs, Sashi. I mean, it's fundamental that they need to save cost right from the outset. I mean, this government has sort of refused to cut back on the costs, and they have continued to borrow. It's sort of difficult to follow their reasonings, Sashi, because at the
Yeah.
end of the day, you need to control the costs of operating the government.
Okay. The ailing sugar industry, in your view, do you think the sugar industry is dead or can it still be revived?
Yes, Shashi, it can be revived, and this is the other thing, because this government was so focused on tourism, they had all their eggs in that basket. Well, well, people understand that agriculture forms the backbone of the economy of this country. But they had all their eggs in that tourism basket. But when that collapsed, they were caught, and now they're trying to refocus on agriculture. But it was rather too late, because the sugar industry has collapsed and there was no viable alternatives. And had they been building on the agricultural sector, they would have been in the position to cushion the demise of the tourism industry.
All right, you just mentioned tourism. There has been, do you think there has been too much reliance on that sector? And given what the tourism industry went through during the COVID crisis, do you think priorities should now be evenly distributed?
Yes, Sasi, I feel that a lot more focus should be given to the agricultural sector, Sasi, because that's where our strength lies. I mean, the tourism sector, we know it's liable to fall anytime. And even when the tourism collapsed, we had planes sitting there at the airport, and we were paying millions. Millions. And it's unbelievable, such the amount of money that was going into those planes.
Right. Let me now turn my attention to the Fiji National University. That's made headlines in Fiji for quite some time and also yesterday. There are rumblings about the issue of the pay structure at the Fiji National University. You were a part of that university. What do you think is the problem there?
Yes, Sashi, I think with the Fiji National University, my time there's a problem there, but I will begin the caveat that that education now, Sashi, is big business. There's no two ways about it. But in that process, most of educational institutions have shifted away from their core role, basically to provide knowledge and skills to students. But let me just focus on this issue. When I was at USP in my first year I was teaching a first year law paper session.
Mhm.
The exam result, I had 60% pass and 40% fail. Okay. And I was told to review the result upwards.
Mm.
And I told them, no, I've already reviewed it. I marked it, I reviewed it, and that's where it stands. I'm not going to touch it. And despite the pressure, I stuck with my gun, Sashi, and I didn't review. Okay. Later on, we were told in no uncertain terms that contracts will depend on lecturers achieving 80% pass rate. My question is this: how can you achieve 80% pass rate with first year students? It may be achievable with second year, third year, fourth year students, but with first year students, they are still trying to find their footing in the academic world. And and these are the kind of things that are happening at the university. Okay, and if I can touch on that, Sasi, like the university, what's their core role? Basically, to teach knowledge. It's a repository of knowledge, Sasi. Yeah? And to equip graduates with the skills that is compatible in the job market. Which means, I mean, if they pass, they should pass. You don't just upgrade them
Mm.
for the purpose of achieving the 80%, because that brings into question the quality of graduates you're throwing out into the market. Okay? And my point is this, Sasi, in such an institution, academics play a core role in that. Okay? And you have support services who are supposedly there to support the academics in achieving that core role. Okay? But my experience in FNU was totally different, Sasi, because my understanding of it is that they are bogged down with bureaucracy that was carried over from the government institution.
Mhm.
Like when you talk about salaries, as you have support services like finance, HR, and property. They have directors and managers, you name it. It's so top heavy, and they have salaries. Well, okay, let me give you an example. A lecturer who has a PhD degree currently at FNU earns around $56,000 per annum. And a manager in these support services earns about $55,000. All right? And where is the parity in this?
Wow.
And I say that the Fiji National University needs a restructure, a rethink, totally.
Wow. So therein lies the problem that if a PhD lecturer gets 56,000 and a manager support services gets 55,000, there is no parity, and it certainly needs a restructure. Now, you've also been suspicious about the qualifications of people, for instance, coming from India and those from South Korea or China, etc. You have stated that these qualifications need to be checked. Someone from CBHTS went to South Korea and came back with a PhD degree in 2 years, you said. What seems to be the issue here?
Yes, Sasi, like I said, because we are top heavy, Fiji National University is top heavy with support services. Okay, and my because of that, they build their own small kingdoms within, and they make things difficult for the academics. So
Mm.
now, because the people in HR department, for example, they tick the box from what is in front of them. Okay, the qualifications, the publication, and all that. They just tick the boxes. If you don't get the boxes ticked, you won't get the job. So for this purpose, they rely mainly on people from overseas, and these people are coming in with suspicious qualifications. Not only suspicious, because the quality of their teaching shows otherwise. And the example I just gave you, someone went to South Korea, came back in 2 years with a PhD degree. Hey, hang on, we have gone through that, and I did mine in 4 or 5 years, I think.
Mhm.
And for someone to do it in 2 years, I really take my hat off to the guy to be able to do it in 2 years. Either that or the qualification obtained is suspect that needs to be examined. And the other point is that because of this anomaly, Look, the University of the South Pacific Sasi pays double what the Fiji National University pays to lecturers, to academics. Okay, they get people from overseas, or even the locals. The locals, they go, they upgrade their qualifications, they publish, they tick in the box, and once they get that Sasi, they go across to USP because USP pays much better. So So all FNU is doing now is recruiting from overseas, and the good ones, the better ones, move on to USP, and they are left with the ones that have suspicious qualifications. Like the former vice chancellor actually wrote an article on that.
Okay, let's move our discussion to the civil service. Do you think there is an open merit system being practiced in the Fiji civil service?
Yes, Sashi, I've always been interested in the OMR system. I actually went to the extent of reading a paper written by the Public Service Commission, and I was on paper, Sashi, the OMR looks fantastic
Mhm.
on paper when you're reading it. But the reality of the matter, Sashi, in the public service in Fiji, the OMR is not really applicable. It's not the same thing on paper and what they are doing. And you got to remember, Sashi, a lot of civil servants have been there for years, and knowledge and experience is not easy. You don't acquire that in 2 years. You can come out from the university with a degree, but the experience will build up your skills and knowledge of the services required. But at the moment, they are replacing such experienced civil servants. They are replacing them with young graduates with no experience at all. And of course, the quality of the service by the civil servant as a whole suffers. And a lot of experienced civil servants have left purely by frustrations.
Right. And do you therefore think that civil service in Fiji has become politicized?
Yes, Sashi, I think the problem with the civil service at the moment it's been politicized. Sashi. The problem now, Sashi, they had decentralized the powers that used to be vested in the Public Service Commission
Commission.
without thinking about it thoroughly. Okay. When you look at it, Sashi, when power was centralized with the Public Service Commission, it served two purposes. One, it should ensured uniformity across the civil service. And two, it served as the final arbiter for disputes. Okay. Now, I'll give you two examples I see. Now, previously when the PSC was there, if someone is posted to an embassy overseas, and the wife is also a civil servant, or the husband is a civil servant, the PSC used to facilitate that by granting them leave without pay. Okay. But now, because the powers have been decentralized to ministries, the powers have been the ministries. Now, what is happening now? You have to resign and go. You don't go and live without pay. That is one weakness, Sas, because there is no no uniformity. People, the power now is vested in the permanent secretaries, Sasi, but even the permanent secretaries' positions are not secure because they can go anytime. And they appoint, they hire and fire with the agreement of the minister, who is a political figure. And I guess the concern there was to address the accountability of the minister within the electoral system that we have, because they are accountable for everything. But sadly, it politicizes appointments. And I want to show you another example, Sashi, and this is very important. I'll show you the corrections department because I was part of the department in most of my life. Okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Now, the power to hire and fire is now vested in the commissioner of corrections. Okay, he hires and fires. He decides on the conditions of service. Okay, during my time there, the subordinate officers of the department had free quarters, free electricity, and free water. Such. So their salary was pegged with these conditions. Okay. Now, they decentralized their power. The power is now vested in the commissioner of prisons. So what he did, he demanded that they now pay rent, they now pay electricity, they now pay water without raising their wages, to fill the void, because their salary was pegged on that conditions of service. So now they are suffering in silence, okay? Because they had to make do, because now they have to pay rent, they have to pay water and electricity. And apart from that, Sashi, if they are disciplined, if they are fired, so to speak, by the commissioner, they got no avenue to fall back on. They either go to court or they just go home and forget about it. While previously, they can go to the Public Service Commission for redress. So that is basically the problem in the civil service at the moment. I don't think they thought it out properly when they decided to decentralize the power of the Public Service Commission.
You've summed that up very, very articulately. You've done it so well. As we hit the home stretch, what is the People's Alliance message to the public?
Well, if I may say so, Sachi, I think the message to the people out there, it's time for change. And people need to think very seriously of their obligation not only to register, but to also vote and make their one vote count. And I mean, let's face it, Sashi, people don't have to listen to anybody. They don't have to listen to me. They don't have to listen to Mr. Rambuka. They can make up their own mind depending on what they see going around them, happening around them. And my advice to the people, make use of it and make use of it wisely.
All right. Is there any other subject that you'd like to touch on in case I haven't touched on before I request you for your final remarks?
No, thank you so much, Sashi. I think that is it for me.
All right. Now, as I said, your final remarks, Dr. Nakarawa, what is your message to the public, to our viewers this afternoon? And don't forget, thousands see the program not on Sunday, but throughout the week.
Thank you, Sashi. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this, Sashi. And like I said, I'm privileged and I'm honored to be invited to be a chief guest for this segment. And to the people out there who are listening in, I thank you for taking the time to listen in. And my advice to you is just this opportunity comes around once in every 4 years. So make it count. Think about what you're voting for and think about what you want in the next government that is coming in. Otherwise, God bless Fiji, Jesus.
I don't like that. Otherwise, God bless Fiji. No, God honestly must bless Fiji with good things for Fiji. Finally, you've just participated in your very first SSTP interview. Do you have any comments or remarks? How did it feel?
No, I really thank you, Sashi. I thank you for this opportunity, and I thank the program for the idea behind it. Because even before being invited, I used to be one of your favorite listeners. I listen into every segment, and people had approached me previously. Do I want to appear? But I was reluctant to appear. But when the invitation finally came from you, I had to take it. And I thank you so much, Sashi, for the opportunity. I think it is a very, very useful tool to keep the people informed.
Well, let me tell you, Dr. Nakarawa, the pleasure is all mine. And let me also share something with you, partially on this platform, but I will tell you more fully in the phone call I'll make to you later. Somebody sent me a message, a person well known to you, and said, I would like to recommend a gentleman to appear on your show. He's fairly quiet, but he has a lot to share with the SSTP viewers. And this person then gave me your name and sent me one of your articles. When I read The Facade of Democracy, I immediately wrote back to this person and I said, done. I said, give me the details and I'll follow it up. And as I said, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on SSTP this afternoon. A big Vinaka Bakalevu to you, sir. Thank you very, very much for being chief guest in Sashi Singh's Talking Point today. It has been a pleasure indeed. I thank you for your very frank views and responses to my questions. And today, you've been one guest who's given a lot of examples in trying to explain things. And that shows me you've been a hell of a good law lecturer at university. I take this opportunity in wishing you and the People's Alliance all the very best in the forthcoming elections. Thank you once again, Dr. Nakarawa. Wishing you a very blessed Sunday, sir.
Thank you very much, Shashi. Thank you.
God bless you. And now, for the for the sake of transparency, I said this right at the beginning of the program, and I'll say it again. People constantly ask whether I have invited the Fiji First members. Yes, indeed, I have. SSTP has extended invitations to the Attorney General, to the Prime Minister's office, as well as to other ministers as well. And as I always say, you, the viewers, are astute, mentally sharp, and clever to figure out why there is a total no show of the Fiji First government on this platform. But my invitation is open, and when and if they accept, I will gladly have them on the show. I thank all those viewers who have taken time to provide their positive feedback with regards to this program. And SSTP, of course, we ask the questions that Fijians all over the world want answers to. That's all for episode 24 this week, but don't go yet. I've got to tell you who our chief guest is for next week. A big thank you first, though, to my regular contributor, Nikhil Singh, for his input in the program today. Thank you, Nikhil. To my SSTP team here at home, a very big thank you as well. I would also like to thank all our viewers for watching this program today. Our chief guest for episode 25 next week, on Sunday, 3rd July 2022, will be Mr. John Sami, former Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Economic Development, Planning, Trade, Industry and Tourism, sole member and chairman of the Prices and Incomes Board, and the architect of the aborted People's Charter in Fiji. There's a lot to discuss with Mr. John Sami in next week's program. So don't forget, we will meet you next Sunday at 11 a.m. Sydney time, 1 p.m. in Fiji and New Zealand, and at 6 p.m. on Saturday in Los Angeles and San Francisco, when our chief guest will be Mr. John Sami. If you have any questions for Mr. John Sami, can you privately message me on the SSTP page? Please like and follow the SSTP page so that you can get instant notifications of the posts. I wish each and every one of you a very safe and happy week. And in closing, I'll leave you with this quote from Peter Marshall. May we think of freedom not as the right to do as we please, but as the opportunity to do what is right. I repeat, may we think of freedom not as the right to do as we please, but as the opportunity to do what is right. That quote from Peter Marshall. Well, that is it for episode 24 of Sashi Singh's Talking Point. Till the next program, I am Sashi Singh, bidding you goodbye, namaste, and ni samode. Goodbye, world.